So, you want to play Gravelands Survivors. Hello and welcome back to Podfinder. My name is Philip, and I'm here to talk about Pathfinder 2nd Edition. This video is specific to preparing for the Gravelands Survivors adventure, the first in the Claws of the Tyrant anthology. As such, I won't be covering the structure of the anthology, or the background lore for the Gravelands. For that, I suggest going back to the intro video for this series. That said, if you're already up to speed on the basic lore of the Gravelands, and have already decided that this anthology is for you, you should be ready to start the video without too much additional prep. This video will function like all my normal player's guides, providing a spoiler-free look at the setup and themes for the adventure, then giving some advice on builds and character ideas, which might be particularly effective or thematic. Getting right into it, Gravelands Survivors is a 2-chapter adventure for first-level characters. Set in the countryside of the Gravelands, this story centers on a group of low-level adventurers attempting to make their way through the undead-infested countryside. The villagers are fleeing the ruins of their home, the town of Yua's Hope, after having spent years in hiding. As they travel, they are pursued by the undead denizens of the region, and must use stealth and guile in addition to pure force to survive against overwhelming odds. The genre here is survival horror, and specifically, survival in a post-zombie apocalypse wasteland. If you're a fan of The Walking Dead, you'll be treading familiar ground here. Just like all good survival horror stories, as terrifying as the undead threats are, interpersonal conflict is just as dangerous and potentially deadly. The PCs and their companions will need to overcome their differences and band together to survive and reach their ultimate goal. On top of all of that, food in the Gravelands is scarce, and the untamed lands present plenty of natural hazards to avoid. This is a high-tension adventure, which should wear away at the PC's sanity and leave them feeling physically and emotionally spent by the end. With all that in mind, what skills should PCs expect to employ in this adventure? Unsurprisingly, the survival skill will shine here, both for navigating effectively and for finding food and water for the group. If your group is having trouble covering the survival skill, I could see some GMs allowing for nature or some relevant lore skills to cover the gap. Hunting lore probably makes the most sense, but lore relating to hunting deities like Erastil or Ketifis could work as well. Ask your GM and see what they say. For knowledge skills, religion is easily the most important, as it will aid the party in identifying the many undead threats they will face. Society is also important, and will help navigate social challenges and understand the remains of lost settlements the party encounters. All the social skills will have some usage, but diplomacy is definitely the most useful for resolving interpersonal conflict. Performance and intimidation will also have moments to shine, however. A number of lore skills could come in handy, but Iomade lore is probably the most useful, with Orc lore coming in second for a few key encounters. And, of course, nothing will increase your party's survivability quite like a dedicated medic. I do suggest against risky surgery, however, as you won't hit the levels necessary to make that feat as reliable as it normally is in this adventure. So, with that high-level understanding in place, where exactly do we start? The adventure begins in Yua's Hope, a small town about 60 miles west of the major city of Velumis, in the lands which were once called Lastwall. Of course, I say Yua's Hope, but I should probably say the crypts beneath Yua's Hope. You see, 6 years ago, something terrible happened. Just north of Lastwall, the nation of Ustalav played host to Gallowspire, the prison of the infamous undead warlord Tar-Baphon. While the threat of Tar-Baphon was always lingering in the background, it was never taken seriously by the common folk. Their lives were plagued far more by raiders from Belkzen, or the occasional cultist or rogue undead who slipped past the Knights of Lastwall. But all that changed one night in 4719. Suddenly, and without warning, travelers from the north rushed into town in the dead of night and raised the alarm, warning of a terrible undead army conquering its way through Lastwall. The leaders of the town quickly issued the order to take shelter, and a few survivors, including the PCs, made their way into the ancient crypts beneath the town. These crypts were rumored to have once sheltered the activities of necromantic cultists, but some saw them as potentially safe hiding places regardless. They sealed themselves within the crypts and waited. Their choice of shelter proved fortuitous. Unbeknownst to the PCs and their compatriots, the crypts remained saturated with lingering necromantic energy, which masked their presence from the waves of undead who poured into Yua's Hope soon after. 6 years have passed since that fateful night, and in that time the survivors in the crypts have been completely cut off from the outside world. They've had no news from the surface and have no knowledge of the fate of Yua's Hope or their fellow villagers. They've remained completely hidden to whatever now exists in the village above, be it living or dead. In addition to the PCs themselves, 15 people took shelter in the crypts. These people were a combination of local villagers and visitors who happened to be in town when the warning was raised. Their leader for the past 6 years has been Dame Talia Gildar, a retired knight of Ozem who took the village under her protection. Her second-in-command, Constan Russi, has been an invaluable asset, as his spellcasting abilities as a cleric of Iomide have allowed him to conjure enough food and water to sustain the survivors, though only barely. In recent days, however, things have begun to change. Dame Talia, who was old even before the undead invasion, has finally died of natural causes. No one in the group of survivors has made any outward statements, but this development has shaken the group to its core. The group mourns its fallen leader, as everyone prepares in their own way for Dame Talia's funeral. Well, now that we know our setting and the setup, it's time to introduce the cast of characters for this particular story. The survivors have been trapped together in the crypts beneath Yua's Hope for 6 years, and so have gotten to know each other fairly well in that time. As such, I'll be going over each character in some detail, as all PCs should be intimately familiar with these NPCs by this point. My hope is that by having a thorough understanding of these characters, you will have an easier time engaging in the tense roleplay which the adventure encourages. First up is Constan Russi, the third-level cleric of Iomide who has been keeping the survivors alive by conjuring food and drink with his divine spells. Constan is one of the social anchors keeping the group from despair during their imprisonment. His faith and devotion is strong, and he often leads the group in prayers and hymns to pass the time. Though stern, he is a kind man at heart, and his wisdom is appreciated by all. Prior to serving as a local priest in Yua's Hope, Constan Russi squired for an Iomedean cavalier named Sir Nalith Clearwater. The aging priest doesn't talk much about this period in his life. Dame Talia Gildar was the other social anchor for the survivors, and her death has shaken the morale of the group to its foundations. An experienced knight, Talia was forced into retirement from active duty among the Knights of Ozem. Unwilling to rest, however, she insisted on remaining useful, and took up management of the many supply lines which ran through Yua's Hope. Her level-headedness and dedication to others made her a beloved leader to the people of Yua's Hope, and doubly so to the survivors these past 6 years. One way or another, her death will certainly herald changes in the crypts. Getting back to the living survivors, Rokvel Hardbrow is one of the few dwarves who lived in Yua's Hope, and her ancestry has given her an advantage in adapting to life underground in the crypts. A migrant from the Five Kings Mountains, she made her living as the town blacksmith, and was well regarded for her hard-working, no-nonsense attitude. She is generally thoughtful and contemplative. She has a notable fondness for young children, but treats those who don't work hard with hostility. Rokvel recently transitioned during life in the crypts, and has begun presenting herself as a woman. Her name, Rokvel, is gender-neutral among dwarves, so she doesn't feel the need to change it. In a very dwarven way, she uses the metaphor of a gemstone to describe her transition, referring to her time presenting as male as her uncut self. Garag Sunbrand is not a native to Yua's Hope, and arrived in town only hours before the shelter order was given. Garag is an orc from Belkzen, and was initially traveling to Lastwall to engage in his first ever border raid. His group came upon a horde of undead, however, and fled before their superior numbers. Arriving in Yua's Hope, Garag sheltered with the locals in the crypts, though this, coupled with his flight from the undead, has brought him great shame. He is generally distrustful of non-orcs, meaning he mostly struggles to find any common ground or peace with his fellow survivors. He has proven helpful, however, as his massive frame has made him useful when heavy objects have needed to be moved, and this usefulness has filled him with pride. Marco Blightender is a human teenager who was born and raised in Yua's Hope. Both his mothers were active Knights of Ozem at the time of the undead incursion, and neither were able to join Marco in the crypts. The unspoken opinion among the survivors is that both women, Amelia and Genevare, are almost certainly dead. But Marco holds out a blind hope that he might see them again. This, coupled with the fact that he spent the entirety of his teen years in the cramped crypts, has only served to heighten his youthful rebelliousness, and the young man bucks at most forms of authority. Still, he hasn't completely managed to hide his insecurities. Observant PCs might notice that he seems to feel guilt over needing more food as he continues to grow taller. He is also oddly defensive when other characters bring up his mothers. Herda Pulsoma is a nervous human with a love of cooking and a tendency toward melancholy. Once the chef at the Hope's Breath Inn in town, Herda was already having a very bad day when the undead arrived on her doorstep. She had just discovered that her husband was planning to skip town to strike up a love affair with a visiting minor nobleman. It was only after she fled into the crypts that she discovered she was pregnant with her faithless husband's child. Yistolo, her son, was born in the crypts, and has grown into a curious but well-meaning boy with a talent for reading his mother's dour moods. Herda is plagued by worry and anxiety, and despises other people playing down her concerns. Still, she takes comfort in the presence of Constan Russi, the priest, and everyone except Constan himself can see that she has fallen head over heels in love with him. The Brushpaw family certainly stand out among the survivors in the crypts, not least of all because they no longer present as humanoids. A family of kitsune, Jono and Yeluva, along with their children Retsnav and Retsnov, survived prior to the undead incursion by trading scouting reports to the Knights of Ozem. They were the ones who learned of the approaching armies of the Tyrant and warned the citizens of Yua's Hope to take shelter. For their aid, the townsfolk offered the Brushpaws a space in the crypts where they could hide. Now, 6 years later, and with no sign of safety in sight, Jono and Yeluva are beginning to regret their decision. As supplies ran out, and the group became reliant on Constan Russi's spells to conjure food, the Brushpaws made a difficult choice. They took to their fox shapes to reduce their caloric needs, consigning themselves to be unable to speak to anyone but each other. They now communicate largely by pantomime and crude pictures which they can draw in the dirt. Finally, the group of survivors are rounded out by the Querulous Quartet, a group of traveling musicians and performers who happened to be in Yua's Hope at the time of the undead incursion. The leader of this troupe is Alizo Shardhelm, a singer and lyricist with dreams of legacy. Born to a family of nobles in Cheliax, Alizo abandoned his privileged life when he could no longer stomach the rules of Chelaxian society. With no talent for militarism or adventuring, he quickly turned to music, where his sharp sense of humor, good looks, and way with words helped him to successfully found the Querulous Quartet with his fellow performers. Alizo makes no secret of his dreams for glory and how he would like to be remembered. He takes great pleasure in the joy he and his fellow players can bring to the survivors with their music. Crassian Pattertap is the lead vocalist among the Querulous Quartet, and is known for his cynical performances which complement Alizo's particular style of lyricism. Crassian is far more selfish than his companions, and is a known coward. He has no desire to go out in a blaze of glory, and would much prefer to die in obscurity, as long as he can do so with a pocket full of coins and a goblet full of wine. Crassian was a thief before turning to a life of performing, and has developed a strong sense for whom he can and cannot trust. He is extremely afraid of betrayal and isn't afraid to speak up or put his foot down if he thinks his best interests aren't being adequately considered. Filling out the quartet are the goblin twins Kleb and Bicky, who play the banjo and the drums respectively. Kleb is the most mischievous of the two, while Bicky is more energetic. The two of them feed back into one another, encouraging one another's antics, but also allowing them to collaborate well as musicians. The pair think quite highly of themselves, and hate to be underestimated, especially in front of others. In their 6 years underground, they've egged one another on, to the point that they now believe that together they could take on nearly any undead threat on the surface. And that's it. Those are the 15 survivors in the crypts beneath Yua's Hope, in addition to the PCs themselves. Now, it's time to dig into some specific player-facing information you can use to build your characters for Gravelands Survivors, beginning with ancestries. When considering the ancestry and heritage for your character, I strongly encourage you to think about how your character connects with their companions in the crypts, and where they fit into daily life in Yua's Hope prior to Tar-Baphon's escape. Don't be afraid to work with your GM to forge a connection with one or more of your fellow survivors. Maybe you play a dwarf who is Rokvel Hardbrow's sibling, cousin, or spouse, or an orc or dromar who fled the undead with Garag. Maybe you're a kitsune who is a relative of the Brushpaw family and arrived with them prior to the undead invasion of Yua's Hope. Or maybe you're the 5th member of the Querulous Quartet, now a quintet. Are you friends or relatives to one of the humans in the crypts? Or were you a traveler passing through town who was in the wrong place at the wrong time? Broadly speaking, Yua's Hope seems to play host to humans more than any other ancestry, and mostly humans of the Varisian, Taldan, and Chalaxian ethnicities, though a few Kelids probably live in the region as well. Dwarves are also somewhat common in the region, due to the relative proximity of both the Five Kings Mountains and the Sky Citadel of Kragadan. Elves and Ayuvaran aren't uncommon in the region either, due to the proximity of Kyonin. Members of any of these ancestries might have made their homes in Yua's Hope prior to the undead incursion. Similarly, a variety of ancestries might have been passing through Yua's Hope and Lastwall more broadly. Plenty of Dromar and half-orcs exist in the region due to the proximity of Belkzen. Goblins and halflings might have also lived itinerant lifestyles in Lastwall prior to the undead invasion. Moving on to the classes which players might consider for their characters, let's first look at the martial classes which might excel in this adventure. The Ranger is a fantastic choice for Gravelands Survivors, as their emphasis on the survival and nature skills, in addition to combat prowess, will perform well here. Of the Ranger subclasses, the Precision Edge is probably the best here, as the extra damage they can deal will be invaluable at low level. I could also see an Outwit Ranger working okay here, but it probably wouldn't be my first choice. Champions, with their high AC and powerful reaction, could also serve well on the front lines, and would fit nicely with the themes of opposition to undeath and religious belief. The justice, liberation, and redemption causes could all work well here, and I generally suggest a sword and board fighting style to increase your survivability. Finally, the fighter is an absolute monster at low level, and if you roll even moderately well, your crits will definitely save the party on multiple occasions. Martial classes should consider weapons which deal either bludgeoning or slashing damage, as they will be the most effective, and the Versatile B or Versatile S weapon traits are quite useful in this adventure. Looking at the Skill Monkey classes, the Rogue and Investigator are both solid options here, as their skill coverage will be extremely helpful at low levels. The Rogue will lean a bit harder into damage, but their sneak attack won't grow beyond 1d6 in this adventure. The Mastermind Rogue, and especially one which leans into religion and undead lores, will excel at identifying and fighting enemies in this adventure. The Thief Rogue, meanwhile, will be more damaging right out the gate. I suggest considering the Forensic Medicine methodology, as it will make you a better field medic, which can be extremely helpful at low levels. Outside of these two classes, I also think the Thaumaturge could perform well in this campaign, particularly one which uses the Amulet implement to mitigate damage, or the Regalia implement to solve the many social issues the campaign presents. Moving on to the spellcasting classes, my top recommendation here is definitely the Cleric, the undisputed master of healing and support. Personally, the Sword and Board War Priest is my single favorite build at low levels, as it can heal, buff, tank, and damage all fairly well. That said, the Cloistered Cleric is great too, and it will serve a party well. Beyond clerics, the Bard is great at low level, assuming your party has more than one character dependent on strikes. The Polymath Bard is probably best here for the added skill coverage. The Summoner could also be really great in this campaign, if for no other reason than it adds more bodies to the battlefield. I like the Psychopomp Eidolon for this adventure, as it will prove especially effective against undead. Players who want their characters to have a religious connection to the storyline and setting have several thematic deities to choose from. In You As Hope, there were several prominent deities who would be great choices for this adventure. Iomedae is extremely popular in Lastwall and is a great fit for any anti-undead adventure. At the same time, for plot reasons, I strongly suggest at least one member of the party should be a follower of Iomedae. Pharasma is another great choice for an anti-undeath adventure, while Erastil is well suited to a wilderness survival story. Other popular deities in the region include Torag, the dwarven patriarch god of smithing and community defense, Desna, the widely worshipped goddess of luck, travel, and the night, and Caden Kalian, the adventurous god of drink. In addition to these suggested deities, I should also caution against characters following Erasni. Though the goddess has recently joined the Core 20 in the meta-narrative, the PCs of Gravelands Survivors entered the crypts beneath You As Hope several years ago, meaning they haven't witnessed Erasni's ascension to divinity and her growing prominence. Since this is an adventure, and not a full AP, Gravelands Survivors doesn't provide unique backgrounds for players to choose from for their characters. Instead, I've put together a list of backgrounds which might be common among locals and visitors to You As Hope. Locals might be acolytes, barbers, cooks, deputies, sheriffs, field medics, or hunters. And given the proximity of undead activity to Lastwall, the Once Bitten background might be common in the town as well. Meanwhile, visitors to You As Hope might be bandits, entertainers, or scouts. All these backgrounds could fit characters in this adventure nicely. If your GM is okay with it, the rare Tyrant Witness background could also make for an interesting story element. The adventure as written assumes that the PCs and their companions have no knowledge of events after the undead incursion around the town. This background, however, could represent a character who saw Tar-Baphon's emergence from Gallowspire, and could therefore make for some tense social interactions within the group. If that sounds fun to you, talk to your GM. GM advice, or how would I run this? Warning. The following section is intended for GMs only. If you are planning to play this adventure, I suggest stopping this video now. I'll need to discuss some spoilers to properly address my suggested adjustments to this adventure. You have been warned. Broadly speaking, I really like Gravelands Survivors, as both a standalone adventure and as a component part of the Claws of the Tyrant adventure anthology. Survival horror isn't my favorite genre when it comes to media, but this adventure managed to hook me and keep me interested as I was reading it. That said, I would make some adjustments as I run this. The main adjustment I would make is to disperse the social challenges throughout the adventure. As written, the adventure focuses the vast majority of the social issues into the first few pages of Chapter 1. I don't disagree with the idea that convincing the survivors to follow the PCs should be a major social hurdle, but I worry that the distribution of these challenges is a bit unbalanced and might make the adventure feel inconsistent. To address this, I suggest splitting the social challenges from Chapter 1 into two parts. an initial phase where the PCs have the opportunity to convince the survivors to allow them to go above ground and explore the ruins of U.S. Hope, and a secondary phase after the exploration, which allows the PCs to use their knowledge and achievements during that exploration to convince the survivors to follow them as they travel to Volumis. This breaks up the social and exploration aspects of the adventure, but also ties them together a bit better, with the results of the exploration feeding back into the social challenge. Similarly, as the PCs and survivors enter the overland travel portion of the adventure in Chapter 2, I would sprinkle in additional social challenges as the tensions in the group ratchet up. A common theme in zombie horror is the idea that the human and societal challenges are the real danger when contrasted with the more straightforward danger presented by the roaming undead. In this case, I would examine each of the events during Chapter 2 and brainstorm some ways which they might be particularly affecting to individual survivors. For example, if the players rest in the Ashavan Shrine, perhaps Herda is unwilling to leave the perceived safety of the site and put her child in further danger, at which point the PCs will need to convince her to carry on. If the PCs have been especially successful in their combat endeavors up to this point, this might prove easier, but the inverse could be true as well. I do want to stress, however, that the constant presence of these social challenges might prove grating for some groups. You'll want to get buy-in from your players to ensure that this doesn't become a slog for everyone involved. I think there's a lot of potential to keep the tension and sense of desperation at a fever pitch, but your mileage may vary. And that about wraps it up for Gravelands Survivors, the first adventure in the Claws of the Tyrant anthology. As far as a first entry goes, I quite enjoyed it, at least as just a reader. Come back tomorrow to check out Ashes for Ozem, the next adventure in the series. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.